Take a deep breath, take the higher road. That's what they always say, as if they know the way. They won't take it from me. But don't ever doubt yourself, 'cause life ain't just a dream. You made your own, so kick and scream. The people will act with a never-ending force. You never had the chance, so what you waiting for? The day has come, my friend, 'cause this is war. It's time and this is war.
Today I want to talk about the unwavering courage and dedication of a small fraction of healthcare professionals during one of the most challenging times in modern history, the COVID-19 pandemic. As the world grappled with an unprecedented health crisis, these extraordinary individuals stood at the front lines, not just as caregivers, but as beacons of hope and resilience. During the darkest days of the pandemic, when uncertainty and fear loomed large, these healthcare heroes risked everything to provide the care their patients so desperately needed. They embraced innovative and at times unconventional therapeutic approaches that were safe, effective, and affordable, driven by a single purpose: to preserve life. Their journey was not without immense challenges. Many of these healthcare warriors were mocked, ridiculed, and ostracized, not by strangers, but by their own colleagues in the medical community. They faced daunting opposition, and some even endured the suspension or revocation of their licenses. A price they paid willingly to stand by their convictions and their oath to do no harm. Despite these adversities, they pressed on with a deep-seated belief in their mission. Their actions were not just a demonstration of medical expertise, but a profound act of human compassion and moral courage. They showed us that in times of crisis, the true measure of our society lies in how we treat the most vulnerable among us. As we reflect on the sacrifices made and the lives saved, we must remember that their legacy goes beyond the confines of the pandemic. They have set a new standard for patient care and medical ethics that will inspire generations to come. These individuals, in the face of overwhelming odds, have shown us the best of humanity. They remind us that even in the darkest times, there are those whose brilliance outshines the darkness. And it is up to all of us to carry their light forward, for in it we find the hope and strength to face whatever challenges may lie ahead. You're listening to Nurses Out Loud on America Out Loud Talk Radio. I'm your host, Nurse Kimberly Overton. Before we get started today, I do want to encourage our listeners, if you have questions or comments, or perhaps you want to share your own experiences with what you're seeing on the front lines of healthcare, you can now submit those to us by emailing them directly to nurses@americaoutloud.com. We would love to hear from you. We encourage all of you to engage in the battle and find your voice in this fight. But until you're able to do that, we will continue to be that voice for you. Joining me today is one of those healthcare warriors, someone who courageously battled the mainstream narrative to ensure that his patients, friends, family, and community members had a fighting chance against what was being deemed one of the deadliest viruses known to man. Scott Miller is here to share his extraordinary journey from pediatric practitioner to a reluctant hero during a global crisis. Facing personal loss, professional trials, and relentless adversity, he will recount stories of lives saved, systems challenged, and the sacrifices that shaped his path. He is the author of the newly released book, The Most Dangerous Man in Washington, a raw and inspiring testament to faith, resilience, and the power of one person to make a difference. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Kimberly. It's weird. It's weird to hear that, because just we were chatting earlier where we're just regular people. So it's humbling. Just it's almost sad that doing what's right is looked at as heroic or courageous.
I agree with you because I've had people, you just said that to me earlier today, and I was like, but I didn't know, and people have said
Well,
that.
what I said earlier was when you were saying some things about me, I said, Kimberly, you're a hero. You are a hero to me, for everything. Knowing, I mean, obviously we don't know all of each other's stories, but knowing, you know, knowing what you knew when you knew it, and the stances you took and the things that you did to serve, that were so outside of, so far apart from any type of mainstream, knowing the attacks you're going to get, all of it, and then setting up remnant nurses to further assist and help people across the country. That's, it's so uncommon, and I'm, it's like, yay you, like, thank you for having that courage.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I certainly appreciate everything you have done. We met several years ago now. And where did we meet? I was it at the hospital homicide.
Yes, San
Yeah, I
Antonio.
can't even remember. There's so
I
many
believe.
different events we
I
cross
know.
paths all the time. But yes, yeah, that was at the hospital homicide. That was, I believe it was down in San Antonio, maybe a couple years back.
Yep.
And you were a speaker there, I believe.
Yep.
And I was a speaker as well. And I had heard your story. I believe that was the first time I had heard, of everything that you had done. And you ended up facing suspension of your license for what you had done in the early days of the pandemic. So if you want to just kind of, give us a brief synopsis of, what that was like, how you got to that point in the early days of the pandemic, where you knew just something is not right here, and you decided to step out of that mainstream narrative.
Yeah, well, it was March 12th, 2020 was my birthday, and I was watching the NCAA men's basketball tournament when all of a sudden there was breaking news, and then we found out they were canceling the tournament, and then I think it was the first time we saw Fauci in that role, and he basically was saying that there's a global pandemic, that there are no treatments, that we basically need to hide. I said basically too many times. That we need to hide in the, in our homes, that we need to shelter. And I'm looking at the TV, and Shelly, my wife, had come in. I called her. I'm like, you've got to see this. And we're sitting there, and my brain could not figure out it. When I hear there's no treatment, and she started to laugh, and she's so kind. She's like, you can fix anything. I'm like, no, I can't. No. But I just thought, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And just that first press conference, and I started studying on SARS-1, and then MERS, the Mediterranean, and came across an article on March 15th out of Italy that had it was like the blueprint of how it binds to ACE2 receptors, and the proteolytic enzymes that cleave S1, all this stuff. And I didn't know any of the words. I had no idea what I was reading, because I did peds and I don't have to get into that stuff. And so I just spent every waking hour outside of clinic studying and researching and going on the NIH and looking these things up. And they were all confirmed by the NIH, everything that I was looking at, whether it was high dose melatonin or why children don't get sick for all intent and purposes from this. And the NIH had all of this information. I thought, what's interesting was, at the end of every single one of their studies, it said, we just don't have enough information at this point, which I felt was found to be convenient for them to have the information, but say, we just don't have enough to put it out there. Because
A
a
little
lot
disclaimer.
yeah, just like, shh, secret. I mean, basically they were like, shh, don't tell anyone of all of the data that we have that conclusively shows that, say ivermectin can inhibit, viral replication, or, and over that time period, I also remembered, I started to think back about parents that I had treated, that were coming in with unrelenting coughs. They had been to the ER once or twice, sent home. They couldn't fill their lungs, and as a curious guy, I would say, well, let's try some stuff. So I nebulized with budesonide, put them on Montelukast, and within a couple of days, we would get a phone call and they would tell us that their symptoms were gone. And it just didn't, I stored it, but it didn't make sense. And then as this unfolded, I remember telling my office manager, like, Carrie, they had COVID. Like that was COVID. And so I started sharing the information with the families. I would write everything down on a piece of paper and I'd give it to them. And I would tell them it's like, vitamin D and Z and zinc and NAC and, the basic stuff. And I just told them, share it with everybody, share it with your Bible study, share it with your church group, share it with your family, your friends, your neighbors, just get this information out. And a woman had come in, a mom had brought her child in, and she had gotten, like, somebody had shared it with her. And she told me, she's like, there's an underground group that meets. You should go check it out, which I did. It ended up leading to me being asked to speak at our Capitol in Olympia on medical freedom. And my purpose initially was to talk about the impact I was seeing on children from the lockdown, which was so devastating, just shockingly crippling on our children. So I spoke at this rally, and after that, it was, and Shelley had begged me not to go. Did I tell you this story?
I don't know if you've told me this one.
So Shelley begged me not to go. I had a couple buddies, some colleagues of mine, where it was kind of like the meeting of the minds, these gentlemen that have far more common sense than me, extremely brilliant. And we just had this round table at my buddy's house, and they're like, Scott, no good can come of this, right? Like, you're gonna put yourself out there. What do you think's gonna happen? I'm like, I don't know. I joke that God removed the gene that allows the brain to have any type of personal self-preservation. So I'm like, I don't know. Like, but I just know that here's an opportunity for thousands of people at one time to get this information. And Shelley and I got into an argument because, we built the practice from nothing. I mean, I quit my job to just start a pediatric practice, and it was viable. I mean, we were doing really well and serving thousands of kids. And she said, why are you willing to throw that all away? And I'm like, I'm just going to go. It's not a big deal. I'm just going to go say some words. And she finally convinced me. She's like, please don't do this. And I said, okay, here's the deal. I'm not going to get up in the morning at 5 a.m. and drive to Olympia. So, unless God wants me to go to Olympia and send somebody, I'm not going. Go to bed. Next morning, about 5:15, there's a knock at the door. And then again, a persistent knock. And I get up and I go to the front door and I open it, and there's two women standing there. And one, Jana, said, hey, we heard you needed a ride to Olympia. I'm like,
that's one of those God winks, Scott.
Yeah. And I'm like, and this is where, like, when I wrote the original version of it, the things that went through my head were like the cursing, which I'm like, oh, blank. And I'm like, really, God? Seriously? I was so unthrilled. I'm just staring at them, groggy and confused, and like, oh, okay. I had to go get clothes. I did not plan in any capacity to do this. And I just sat in the middle right seat of this minivan with these two like soccer moms just schooling me on, medical-y stuff. And I wrote my speech, and I was trying to carefully craft it so I wouldn't burn it down, and had all of my papers in order as I was called up to the stage. And I get to the top step, and there was a cable across there for the speakers, etc. I trip on it. The papers go flying, and I hit the deck, and there's this woman, Becky, who and she picks them up, in this scattered order, and now I have no idea, what I'm gonna. So I'm holding them. I walked up to the lectern and I looked out across the crowd, and I'm like, well, apparently I wasn't supposed to say this. And so I just was like, all right, Lord, give me the words. And so for the next, I don't know how long I spoke, and they were words I hadn't intended on saying, but it apparently struck a chord. And shortly after that, the state started coming after me. So it was first complaint was coming after me for lying on my original license or medical license for Washington State, which was one of the most comical things I had ever read. It was like an Onion parody. And I thought, I didn't even get an attorney. I'm like, this is comically insane. Like, obviously they know I didn't. I mean, that was 7 years ago, and I have to read anyway. But
I don't know if I said that in my intro, but you are or were a physician's assistant licensed in the state of Washington. So you had certainly a lot to lose by speaking out. But I think, like most of us, you wouldn't have thought that speaking out with what we were saying, which was, basic stuff, talking about mitigating damage that can be done from a virus. Even if it's an unknown, we knew it was a respiratory virus. And what do? We mitigate damage, right? That's what we've always done.
Yeah.
So I don't think any of us thought speaking out would be affecting our licensure.
Yeah. And I didn't even, it was weird because it's, when we say speaking out, I was just speaking. Right? I was sharing, right? Like my brother had asked me one time, why did you take on the entirety of the medical system? Why did you take on the WMC? And I'm like, I didn't. The only thing I took on were patients calling, asking if I would help. That's okay. That's not okay. Let me retract. So I not until later. I mean, it was a bit later, but initially it was just, can you help? So there's two questions. It's like, can you, and then will you? And if you can, you better, right? Like, that was just for me. It's like, if the answer is yes, then do, right? Like, always do when you're given the opportunity to serve. And so I really didn't think anything of it. And I was able to, apart from ongoing attacks, I pretty much put those out of my mind because we were so busy putting out fires. And I had to run my peds practice, and then I went on a campaign to defund our schools. And so I wrote mask exemptions for like a few thousand people so they could petition, especially private Christian schools, to keep them open, or they would unenroll the kids and not do distance learning. So we were able to open up a few private Christian schools locally, which was awesome. I mean, the parents that were able to send their kids to school and not have to mask and not have to distance it, the difference in the psyche of those kids and the mental health of those kids were
those are the consequences of the pandemic that not a lot of people talk about. The toll that it had on the mental health of everybody in the country, but particularly of the children who were forced to mask, especially the ones that are so young and they are, just developing these social skills. And, we take a lot of social cues from our facial expressions, and speech is delayed in a lot of these children. So there were really far-reaching consequences. So things that you did during that time became, we look at them like they're little things, but they're truly not little things. You made a huge difference in the mental health of these children in your area. But as I was researching, Scott, I was looking up a couple of the articles that came out about you back in 2021. Did you ever just Google yourself?
I think I have. I think I found, like, from a 6-month window, I think I found over 100 articles written about me.
Well, this was one of my favorites that I found. This is from the Daily Beast. Have you seen this?
Oh, ivermectin crazy. It's a picture of me.
Ivermectin crazy physician assistant, license suspended.
The Daily Beast. Now, MedCram and Medscape and MedPage are more fun because the vitriol and hate on those it's like, bless your heart. I'm like, oh, bless their heart. But Daily Beast, that with the picture of Parker P and me down at the Columbia, And yeah, ivermectin crazy.
This was my favorite. It says Scott, this is from October 16th, 2021. Scott Miller allegedly tried to bully local hospital staff into giving his COVID patients the unproven drug. Interesting, right? So they call it unproven. Ivermectin has been safely used in humans, by the way, for more than 3 decades. It has a higher safety profile than an aspirin or a Tylenol. We all know that, right? That's just irrefutable. However, they didn't seem to have a problem giving an unproven drug like remdesivir.
Yeah,
They didn't
or
have a problem giving the
or
vaccine.
tocilizumab, right? Like, and here's the I have to. This is one thing that was interesting, and because the pharmacies took that off their script, it wasn't part of their formulary, so they couldn't give it. It wasn't there, right? It was taken off the formulary, and I found that early on when I think my first hospital advocacy call was late summer of 2020. Minnesota. Anyway, so I never once used the word ivermectin when talking to a nurse or a doctor because I knew that it would shut the conversation down.
Yeah.
The only thing what I did was walk. I'd look through their chart. I would get access to the EHR through the family, and almost none of the patients in Washington State, almost none received antibiotics, and pretty much every one of those patients had a secondary bacterial pneumonia that they were still calling COVID pneumonia. And what was the end result? They would end up getting sepsis, going into multi-organ system failure, and die. So I was like, well, that's preventable. So it was trying to figure out a way to convince or trick, if you will, the doctors into, I would go through this. I would give a list, and I would always say, well, all right, first, let's start from the premise of do no harm, right? We can agree on that. And I'd say yes. And once and then we know that they're in a pretty bad situation, right? We know that their outcome, it doesn't look great. Like, we can agree on that. And we know that there are other things not that treat COVID, right? Like, I understand that these are not treatments for COVID, but there are other things that we know that can downregulate. And then I would get into the pharmacokinetics of different meds. Now, we can agree that there's really no negative side effect profile from doing, moderate to high dose thiamine, right? Like, we can agree on that. And we know that it downregulates the, Th17 pathway, right? Like we all know that, correct? And they don't, but it makes them have to say yes. So and so we were able to guide them into giving quite a few things. And then I would bring up stuff that I knew they would say no to. I knew they would say no to colchicine, even though they're willing to give an IL-6 inhibitor like tocilizumab. Colchicine's downregulating multiple, but I knew they would say no. So I would throw those things in so they could at least maintain, like, well, no, we can't do that. I understand. Like, I can appreciate that. Thank you. And then I'd move on to, budesonide. But at a certain point, so what was interesting, Kimberly, this is of the thousands of crazy. What was crazy is there's one hospital in particular in our area where a critical care nurse told me this later. She's like, we started to see a trend where, so this guy would call and talk to either the intensivist or pulmonologist. They would get angry, but within 3 or 4 days, the patient that he called about would walk out of the ICU and the rest of them died. And it was creating a bit of a stir. And at one point, this one, I won't get into it because it's too long of a story, but we ended up, this man was about to be put on a ventilator. He was mid-40s. And had a guy come over to my house with his dually and a generator and a blender. And I had all the meds that we needed in the house. He met the wife over at the ER parking lot. And I told them how to, the story of how to get the nurses to get that to him. And he drank it. And the next morning he was sitting up FaceTiming his wife. And the pulmonologist comes in and she's like, whoa, look at you. And shocked at the transfer rate. Now, we probably put 30 things in the smoothie and like really high dose Solumedrol and, all these things. But and she looks through the chart and she goes, "Oh, so somebody dropped off a smoothie last night." And she looks at him. So he is FaceTiming his wife. She looks at him and she says, "I know what was in that smoothie. And I know that that's going to damage your liver. And I cannot, like, basically, I cannot allow you to have that anymore." Now, so he died. But the fact that she said, "I know," the fact that she saw the transformation from going to be being put on a ventilator to sitting up at, like, I think he was down to 15 liters, which is nuts. I mean, like, yeah. FaceTime his wife and saying, "I know what was in that smoothie."
Because she saw the difference that it was.
Yeah, but she saw the difference and then banned it. So a couple days later, that hospital came out with a no outside food or beverage policy.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it was really amazing to me the lengths that these doctors and nurses would go to keep this life-saving medication away from people. Again, we knew this medication, it had been around for decades, but yet over and over again they kept on trying to paint this as a dangerous drug or horse paste or whatever the FDA ridiculous statement the FDA came out with. You're not a horse, y'all. You remember that?
Yeah, horse dewormer.
Yeah. So they started,
I think that was end of July or beginning of August of 21, because I didn't have an issue. I prescribed ivermectin. I prescribed thousands and thousands of doses of ivermectin without any issue I mean, I prescribed it to kids before COVID all the time for head lice or scabies, and it worked great. But I had no issues at all. I never had a pharmacy say no. It wasn't until the FDA came out and made that post, that statement. And then the pharmacy board got together and then put down this, because I talked to a pharmacist friend of mine. He's like, "Yeah, we got a kind of an alert from the pharmacy board that, was putting a ban on it." So I had to get more creative how I prescribed it. So I have to tell this story. So, and, I don't know if there's going to be extra repercussions in sharing some of it, but what I would frequently do is I would ask it'd be like a mom or dad that was sick. I'm like, "Do you have kids?" "Yes." I'm like, "How old are they?" And they would tell me. I'm like, "All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to prescribe ivermectin to your entire family. Primarily it's going to be, quote unquote, for the kids, for like scabies or head lice. And I'm prescribing it to you guys prophylactically to avoid it." So it didn't. And then I'd send a prescription for hydroxyzine and antihistamine for itching. And so I'd prescribe a couple other things. So it literally looked like it was for, say, scabies.
Isn't that so sad that we had to do things like that?
Yeah, they would let it go through. And I did that so many times to as a ruse, so the pharmacist wouldn't think, "Oh," and I would have to send it to a different, so I'd send the meds, the budesonide and montelukast and methylprednisolone, etc. I'd send all those meds to one pharmacy, and then I'd have to send the ivermectin to a different pharmacy with the meds for the kids. Again, so it was innocuous, and the amount of time I spent just managing the meds or trying to get a pharmacy to release meds was so shocking. It was crazy how it's hard to subvert the system.
And it was ridiculous because I'll tell you, early on in the pandemic, I wanted to start taking ivermectin prophylactically because I was working in the ICU at the time. And I did start taking it. I actually found somebody to prescribe it for me. And early on, I didn't have a problem. I was able to fill one prescription and my insurance even covered it, right? It was like $5 copay. I was like, "This is great." But then I think by the time I tried to refill that prescription, it was over. Like they just were not allowing these to go through anymore. So now the pharmacists are interfering. That's not in their scope. to
Nope.
determine, when a licensed prescribing practitioner writes a prescription, it is really outside the scope of the pharmacist to decide whether or not that they're going to fill that prescription, or what you can write. Off-label medications are used off-label all the time, and
All
have been
the time.
for
Yep.
years, and nobody has ever questioned it. But the thing about the ivermectin, and the thing about, because it worked, was that, if you recall, the remdesivir was being used under an emergency use authorization, but so wasn't the vaccine. And if you're familiar with an emergency use authorization, these cannot exist if there is a viable treatment.
Yep.
So with the ivermectin working and doing well for so many, that emergency use authorization for those vaccines would have been null and void. And
Yeah.
that's why they demonized this safe and effective and affordable drug for so long.
It's
Yeah,
just
so-
weird how long it took for them to do it, because hydroxychloroquine was demonized pretty much
Yeah.
right away because Trump brought it up, right? And so they're like, well, we can't do that. But I mean, it took them, the in vitro studies on ivermectin, I think, took place on April 3rd or April 4th. I think it was April 3rd of 2020 in Australia. And they found, 5,000, percent reduction in viral replication or viral load within 48 hours. I'm like, that's cool. Like, I mean, that, I don't care if it's that's good information for us to have. And then let's look at specifically how and why it's able to do that. But, when I looked back, I'm like, how did it take them so long to come down on it? It was really interesting. Even after, Pierre Corey and Paul Merrick, or Dr. Corey and Dr. Merrick were talking about it, and they had when Senator Ron Johnson held those hearings, and I would have thought they would have cracked down on it immediately, but they didn't. It confuses me because they were so gung ho, but it took them another like 7 months, 8 months to just put the full hammer down on it.
Yeah, it was interesting time for sure. Well, more on that. We've got a hard break we're coming up on, but we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we get back. America Out Loud Talk Radio plays on the iHeartRadio network. You can also listen on our media player from any web browser anywhere in the world. We have the best in-class apps available on Apple, Android, or Alexa, 24/7. Great talk radio. All of our shows go to podcast the following day. You can hear them on apps such as Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, iHeart Podcasts, and many more. Be sure to subscribe and rate the show on Apple Podcasts for me. Don't forget to check out our online store at americaoutloud.shop, where you can find all of the products that we represent on our network at a discounted rate, including an incredible line of products from Chemical Free Body. Unlike the majority of supplements you'll find on the market today, with Chemical Free Body, you won't have to worry about harmful ingredients, binders, fillers, or flow agents. Their ultra-safe breakthrough nanosilver technology destroys pathogens, balances the microbiome, and boosts immunity. All of these products are proudly made in the USA and are backed by an unheard of double your money back guarantee. I've made a twice daily Green 85 drink part of my routine, which has led to a decrease in belly bloat and an increase in my energy throughout the day. Use promo code OUTLOUD to save 20% off the Healthy Gut Bundle. I'll catch you on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
I've got 2 questions for you. Have you been feeling off since COVID? Are you struggling with lingering symptoms? You're not alone. As Dr. Peter McCullough says, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Introducing the wellness company's Spike Detox Trio. This powerful supplement combines nanokinase, bromelain, and turmeric to support your immune system and fight off harmful spike proteins. Nanokinase improves circulation, while bromelain boosts antiviral defenses, and turmeric reduces inflammation. It's not just another supplement. It's a scientifically backed solution to help you bounce back from COVID. Imagine waking up filled with energy, feeling clear-headed and vibrant again. It's possible with Spike Detox Trio. Reclaim your health now by visiting twc.health/outloud and use promo code OUTLOUD for 20% off your first order right now.
During COVID, we got educated on the power of natural virus protection and immune boosting using vitamins A, C, D, zinc, and quercetin. The problem? Getting them at the right dosage from truly natural sources that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. Enter the Daily V-Stack. Using breakthrough cellular absorption technology, we put those vitamins together and supercharge them with a complete multi-mineral complex. The Daily V-Stack is basically an oral IV of 6 products, all in one at an affordable price. Go to chemicalfreebody.com/outloud today. Get the Daily V-Stack, protect yourself, boost your immune system, and save 20% on your first order.
58 million people suffer from joint aches and stiffness in the U.S. every day. Ignoring chronic joint discomfort can affect mobility and your quality of life. Advanced nutrition company Healthy Cell created joint health and mobility to support connective tissue, joint lubrication, and reduce joint irritation with curcumin, omega-3, chondroitin, glucosamine, and hyaluronic acid for joint comfort and flexible range of motion. And Healthy Cell's not a pill. It's a patent-pending gel you swallow with clinically proven ultra-absorption of science-backed ingredients. You would need to take 11 pills to get the same amount of nutrients in each gel pack. And these great-tasting gels come in a small packet. Tear off the top, shoot it down, or mix it in water. It's 100% drug-free joint support. Go to healthycell.com and use code OUTLOUD for 25% off your first order. healthycell.com, code OUTLOUD for 25% off.
We wouldn't go a day without washing our hands, brushing our teeth, and washing our nose. Whoa, wait, we wash our nose? Yes, the number one place where bacteria, viruses, and pollen enter the body is through the nose. So the average person breathes over 23,000 times a day. That's 23,000 opportunities for bacteria, viruses, and irritants to get into your nose and make you sick. For an extra layer of protection, wash your nose with Xlear. That is Xlear, Xlear. Xlear's drug-free nasal spray features xylitol, an ingredient proven to block adhesion of many nasty bacteria and viruses and effectively clean, not just rinse like a saline, but wash your nose. Xlear nasal spray quickly alleviates congestion, opens your airway, and ensures your body's natural defenses are strong. Read the research studies for yourself at Xlear.com. That's Xlear.com. Protect yourself from the pathogens and junk you breathe. Pick up a bottle for you and your family today.
Struggling with rising healthcare costs? Health insurance premiums are up 47%. Enter the One Wellness Elite membership for $100 per month. You get 2 free nutraceuticals, free prescriptions on 800-plus meds, and 24/7 telemedicine. America Out Loud listeners get an exclusive 20% discount. Go to twc.health/outloud. Use the code OUTLOUD.
The suppression of truth in a world of darkness, void of any soul, requires that we are rightly informed, properly equipped, and strongly motivated to fight the corruption. AmericaOutloud.news is that place to awaken your heart, soul, and mind to the out loud truth. Now is our time. America Out Loud Talk Radio. Liberty and justice for all.
Welcome back to Nurses Out Loud on America Out Loud Talk Radio. I'm your host, Nurse Kimberly Overton. Wherever you're listening from today and whatever you're doing, I thank you for giving me the gift of your time. Be sure to make AmericaOutloud.news your daily stop for all the latest news and happenings. We all must do our part and share the stories, the articles, the podcasts, and videos so we can help secure America's future. If you're just joining us, I have been talking with Scott Miller, physician assistant and author of the new book, The Most Dangerous Man in Washington. Scott, thanks again for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And I'm so excited to have you here. And it's taken a while. We've been trying to record this episode. Let me tell you guys how long I've been trying to record this episode with Scott. And it's all my fault because I would get sick or had just so much going on.
You're busy. Listen, I I just hang out here in fairly inert state, just being, so it's
Well, I appreciate you being so flexible and understanding, and you're just so wonderful. You're just a wonderful person. You're a wonderful friend, and I'm very honored to have you here on my show. I think about the things that you do and the courage that it took for you to step out. And like I was saying earlier, for me, it was, I didn't know what the alternative was. When everybody's like, I can't believe you did this when, so many other people are just kind of towing the line. And I just think to myself, well, what's the alternative? Are we just going to sit here and let people die? I can't imagine.
and I there's that, and Shelly just handed me the book, and she had a page that was dog-eared, where the absurdity, right? So where, and depending on where you lived geographically, Washington State, like probably New York, New Jersey, California, and Washington were some of the absolute strictest, or most strict. Sorry. But can I share something? Because she just handed it to me.
Yeah, of course.
So she started laughing. So I said, I walked into PetSmart breathing without the adulteration of a mask. As I entered the store, I accidentally turned right. It just so happened that the powers that be designated that aisle as a one-way heading back to the checkout counters. I was obviously unaware of this mistake because my visual cortex doesn't register stupidity regarding changing my behavior. I had my earbuds in, listening to a Dr. Mo Bean lecture on TH1 and TH2 immunity when I finally heard a loud voice shouting, "Sir, sir, sir, you need a mask to be in the store and cannot walk that way down the aisle." I turned and responded, "I assure you I don't, and I'm confident that I can. See, I'm successfully walking down the aisle right now. I'm more than happy to teach you how to do it." I felt like I had been transported into a socialist mind control nightmare while I watched people blindly complying as they looked at me as though I was some potential vector of death. When I got home, I told Shelley about the incident and said, "Everyone was following these arrows and standing on circles. I think humanity might be fucked." Which I then had to change to screwed because I said that. But so a lot of the war, like Shelley called, a lot of the war that I waged was, and it was the Attorney General and the medical commission that had put something out that I was at one point the most dangerous man in Washington. But it was I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, like in every platform I could. I was sharing information. I was begging people, stop complying, stand up, stop. Like, I cannot be the only person in a Costco or a Walmart or a Target or what without a mask. Like, this has to stop. You have to stop obeying. Like, I serve one master, period. Yeah. I will not bend the knee to some fake BS. I won't do it. I will never do it. And if somebody put a gun to my head and they say, "Deny your creator," and pull the trigger.
Yep.
And you have to be forged in fire. I don't even look at it as courage. It's faith. And
true.
Faith over fear. Statement in my book. It was I make up a lot of, quotes. But I was like, truth kept silent is worse than a lie. Simple quote, but I firmly believe that. It's like, if you know the truth, if you know truth,
yeah,
and that truth can benefit people, you must speak it.
Absolutely. Silence is compliance, period.
Yep.
Period. And I appreciated you had sent me a couple of chapters of your book before it was released to read, which I really appreciated. And I have to say, I loved your book. I haven't read the whole thing yet, obviously, but what I've read of it, I really enjoyed. I love your style of writing, which I told you it's very engaging. It's a very, easy to read. But what I really loved the most about it, and I don't even think I'd realized this initially, as like I said, we've met a couple of years ago and have seen each other on multiple occasions. We've had many conversations. But I just didn't realize how similar our stories were, like from the beginning of the pandemic. And as I was reading and, kind of reliving that, it was like you were taking me back through the pandemic. And it was kind of painful in a way to revisit that. But it was like one of those things that's just so necessary, like lest we forget what they did to us and what we had to do just to preserve life, just to be able to help our family and friends and people in our communities. But everything, our stories were very, very similar. And the feelings, you talked a lot about the emotions that you were having in that early times, when that just feeling completely alone. And I can remember just feeling the same way. And I had an actual like visceral response to reading that chapter, that initial chapter that you sent me. So I would really highly encourage my listeners to get this book and to read it and to, experience. It's okay to feel the things, right? It's okay to go back and experience, because like I said, lest we forget what they did, because they are trying to do it again. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. This was just a beta test to see.
Oh, dress rehearsal, 100% dress rehearsal for what is to come. They wanted to see who would comply. And like the answer is just about almost everybody.
Well, and how easily, right? Because it only took a week or two to get 99% of the population to comply. But the chapters I sent you were deeper into book one. But I think that, this is, I told her, like the group of guys, one of them is probably one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. And I call him the professor. And he's made a lengthy strides in his journey from being a progressive Canadian to a staunch conservative American. But he had read, I think he's like, send me a couple things. And so I said, it was maybe 10 pages, nothing. And he said, he's brought it up. He said, you talk a lot about God. Tell me about that. And so we had a lengthy conversation. I said, Professor, if you read the book and by the end, you don't believe in God, you don't believe in a creator, then I failed. Because the stories, I mean, just what I told you about Olympia, right? That wasn't a me thing.
Yeah.
That was literally God sending these people to drive me there. That you can't argue with that, right? I mean, you could, like I did a little bit. I was like, damn it. But, with every story I tell, every single story through there, and I write about it, like within each of those stories, there's hundreds of other stories, that the fabric of the lives of the people that I was blessed enough to be able to engage with. When I would hear their stories, and like, how did you find? And they would tell me, their friend and their friend, and I'm like, dude, that shouldn't have been able to happen, right? There were too many. It was so coincidental. I don't believe in coincidence, but it was so random that you would look at it and like, that can only be a God thing, to move like 4 or 5 different relatively impossible things to happen, to put people in certain places to be able to achieve saving a life. And I think that's, for me, as I sat down, when I wrote the original manuscript, I was taking notes, because I journaled not every day, but almost every day, because it was the only way to get the anger out. And so the original manuscript was pretty angry. And my father-in-law read it, and he said, he's practiced for 55 years. And he said he loved it, but he's like, take the vitriol out. And I'm like, come on, that's
my therapy.
I wanted it to be this like aggressive, slap you in the face type of an experience, so people that could like really see. And he said the stories are too good to taint it with that. Yeah. And I actually told him, I'm like, I'm very angry. I love that he's such an amazing man, but I'm like, I hate you for saying that, because I know you're right, but I don't want to change it. And it was a specific chapter. And I remember next morning, I came out to the office and I sat down and I started praying. And I'm like, Lord, what story do you want me to tell? Like because he asked, who is this story for? Like, he said, it's something I can't fathom what you've been through. It's amazing. And he's biased, obviously. He's like, who's the story for? And I was like, anyone that was affected in any way by what has happened over the last 4 years. And he said, then just tell it like that. Just share it in a way that's you don't have to call the doctors murderers or the hospitals killing fields. I'm like, well, I kind of do,
Yeah.
but I'll soften it and let the reader come to the conclusion by the descriptors I use versus just out and out calling them murders. But I watched it happen. I mean, they did it to two of my patients. They literally murdered them, and it's like I want to say those words, but
it's hard to find a way to sugarcoat it. I've been trying for years to find a nice way to say that they are systematically murdering patients for profit. I've yet to find a nice way to say that, because that's exactly what was happening inside of hospitals all across this country. And I want to clarify.
Wait, hold on. If we can find a nice way to say it, we're in trouble.
Right. Right. And I want to clarify that I'm not saying that people, your nurses and your doctors like are going in there maliciously trying to murder people. That isn't the case. And that's not what I'm saying. Like, nurses were going in, we were going into our shifts and we were doing everything that we could, within, to try to help these patients. But it was the protocol. It was the protocol of medicine. And unfortunately, at some point when we're not speaking out against it, like I said earlier, silence becomes compliance. And that's a real problem and a real issue. But I mean, people, I think, mistake when I say that they're murdering people, that they think that like their local nurses and stuff are just going in there and just, being malicious about it and intentionally murdering people. That isn't the case. But by following these protocols that are harmful to patients, they, in my opinion anyway, are they're failing to protect their patients and to advocate appropriately when many of them.
I'm going to agree with that. My experience was a little different, where we had one hospital where they had a big tent outside where like a triage, and a couple of the doctors said one of them said these words, another one said something similar. We need to take all of the unvaccinated and put them out in that tent and light it on fire.
Oh my goodness.
Now they had some of those, or let's just say partially vaxxed, because that data is skewed. But so if that's your patient, you have somebody, and I got a lot of people out of that hospital. And I heard that, and I had in my head, I'm like a FU mentality. Like I will do everything in my power and outside of my power to protect everyone I get, like anyone that reached out. Day and night, it didn't matter. I'm like, I will do everything I can to get them away from those doctors, because if they're willing to say that out loud.
Yeah. We did hear a lot of that.
They're certainly not treating. I mean, they're certainly not caring for that patient. If you have that much vitriol and hate, that you can say that you say they should go home. They should not just go home and die, but they should be put out in that tent and light it on fire. That's. I'm going to stop. It's just pretty diabolical.
Absolutely. And scary times that we're living in. And the fact that so many people not only were saying things, like they actually like literally believed that.
Mm-hmm.
They believed in what they were saying, and that somehow it was the unvaccinated. Talking about it was the pandemic of the unvaccinated, which is, oh God, it would take us too long to get into how absurd that was. That's going to have to come for your next time coming on the show, because we are out of time. I can't believe it. It goes by so quickly. I never worry about finding topics of conversation or running out of anything to talk about with you, Scott. That is for certain. There is definitely a wide range of topics that we could cover, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk about, a little bit about your journey and where it's headed now. I do want you to tell really quickly before we end the show where they can find your book. I will of course be including the link in the show notes, but where else can they find your book?
Right now, it's just Amazon. We had it on, like, I had a website and my wife had a website, but Amazon banned us. So,
Good for you. I love it.
Really, it was like, she made it a week before getting banned. But yeah, so you can just, the most dangerous man in Washington. And in fact, Shelley Googled it yesterday, and it came up as the first search. Now maybe that's the metrics. She Googled it before, but I've been told it's an eye-opening read, and I would, and when I say this again, the other reason that when my father-in-law asked, why did you write it? The other reason, there's information in there that every human being needs to know to have the things in your home to not be in an emergency.
Exactly.
Things that I did. It's like, what would Scott Miller do? Or how did he do all of that? I have stuff in the, I have things in there. It's like, this is what Scott Miller would do. This is how can we walk into a home with somebody sitting at 65 and get them stabilized without supplemental oxygen within 45 minutes? That's what I would do. That's what I would have.
WWSMD. What would Scott Miller do? We need to get little bracelets.
Well, medically, outside of that, don't ever just write that out and then put a big circle and a slash through it.
Right.
I'll
make the t-shirt. I'll design the t-shirt. We'll get it out there. You can start a trend.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Absolutely, Scott. Thank you so much for being here. We will have you back again. It's always, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
And that is all the time that we have for today, friends. But remember, we are here on the air 5 days a week, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern with a different nurse host daily. You can also catch the encore at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please be sure to tune in and listen to myself and these courageous nurses. As we walk you through all of these hot topics, we will empower you with information and education. We will advocate and we will stand in the gap for you because we are nurses and this is what we do. I'm your host, Nurse Kimberly Overton, and you can find me here every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. Until next time, be safe, be well, and God bless. Remember, we are in a war for truth. We are putting out a bounty on the real misinformation and exposing the purveyors of propaganda. No topic is off limits as we shine our lights and expose the darkness.
It's time